folks. I was thinking, how should I start this session? And I thought of, something that happened last week to me when I went and met a pharmaceutical company CEO. So I enter the room and I'm talking to him and telling him, saying, hey, I want to talk to you about what you're doing with all of this new technology coming in. And the thing he says to me is that if anybody comes into this room and says agentic one more time, I'm going to beep, 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 right? And I'm sure that this is going to be one of many sessions that you're going to have throughout the day, which talks about agentic and what to do with it. But I thought I'll try to give it a little bit of a twist as much as I can and say something new. Let me start off again with some numbers. Everybody has their own version of these numbers. But really the big message is that we have seen a lot of POCs with respect to agentic and generative AI. We have seen a lot of questions around the ROI that people are getting out of generative AI. And there has been this little bit of disillusionment that has happened over time with respect to how is this really being useful? Am I really driving key metrics in the business? And how do I move from something like a siloed POC to something that actually works? Now, I want to talk to you about why this could be happening and how we can think about it differently. And the first problem that I'm going to talk about is the name. Now, agentic AI is defined and considered as the next paradigm, and we heard Sanjeev talk so eloquently about where and how it has come about agents working together to drive a certain task, do certain tasks, get a certain outcome. What's the problem with this? The problem, at least as we see it, is that agentic AI emphasizes the word agent. And doesn't talk enough about what the agent is going to do. What is the objective? What is the purpose that the agent is trying to solve? Or a group of agents is trying to solve. So what ends up happening is that you end up having bolt-on implementations on a dashboard. You end up having no actionable insights because of the fact that you get technically correct answers, but not really useful answers. You get context blindness. You see that there are things that are there within the organization in someone's head or in a system somewhere which the agent is not able to get out. And you see integration as a challenge. You have ERP systems, you have multiple systems. I'm sure you have tons of systems roaming around in different functions. And how does this implementation that you're trying to do sync with those systems is still not very clear. So how do we shift from these siloed standalone agents to a point where you are getting to context-driven workflows, where context has been embedded within the workflows that you're actually trying to automate or do something with? Let me talk a little bit about a brief concept before I explain how, right? Let's look at a graph with two axes. The first is the purpose, which is the Y. And from left to right, the purpose, the complexity of the purpose is increasing. And the other axis is the context, the what. What do you need to know? What does anyone need to know to achieve a certain objective, so achieve a certain task? And as you go from bottom to top, context keeps increasing. Now, if you look at the bottom left corner, you'll see that these are the kind of tasks that are easy to understand and define, and they don't need too much context. Think of your text-to-SQL agent. Think of your document summarization. These are tasks which are not complicated in their objective. Now you go one step higher from there, and you talk more about market research agents. Now, these are a little bit more complicated. They need you to understand the business a little bit better of what you're trying to do research on, and hence need more context around it. Let's go one more step up and think of your marketing manager co-pilots, sales rep co-pilots that you're trying to build. Now here, you need context around who is the rep, what do they need, what do they care about, and how do you basically give that information to them. So the context of the rep and the organization, their goals matters quite a bit. Now, if you go one more step, you get to a workflow, which is about, if you take a marketing example, you're talking more like content management. You want to drive content in the right way, you want to use AI to do it, but now you need to know, or the AI needs to know, what is the process that you need to follow? Is there an approval process? Is there who are the different stakeholders? And in every organization, at least we've seen, that changes. The last is where you're trying to drive a big initiative. I want to reduce customer churn. I want to increase my marketing ROI. Now, in these kind of systems, which you need to tackle as a whole, you need a lot of context. Now, as you can see, it's a very diagonal path. And the reason why it is that way is as purpose gets more complex, the more context is needed. This is not very different from what happens with all of us when we are trying to run teams. As you expect people to do more complex tasks, their knowledge, their know-how of the organization and of what they need to do has to get better. And it's very similar. When you stray off this path and you try to achieve complex objectives using low context, you're not going to get value. So what are we talking about here is basically how do we infuse agentic with the right purpose, with the right context to actually make a difference to the system that you're trying to run, and hence the word systemic AI. What we feel is that instead of talking more about the agents, let's talk more about the purpose. Let's talk more about what system you're trying to solve this for. How do we get deep integration? How do we increase context? How do we build feedback loops? How can we create trust with users who are actually going to use some of this stuff so that they're actually informing it rather than just leaving it on the wayside? How can we orchestrate across functions? I've seen multiple organizations where there are such deep silos between one function and the other that you can't really break them unless you bring them together in some way. And for that, you need the context which is sitting in either place very effectively, right? So this is what we want to talk about. So now how can we think about this in the current landscape that we have? I'm sure all of you have been, a lot of people have already invested in a bunch of the tools that you see here. And I'm sure that every other day there is someone or the other who's coming and talking to you about buying a new product. How can we think about this landscape? I think the first thing to think about is, again, in terms of the complexity of what you're trying to achieve with these tools. If you look at the top, you'll see that tools which are more focused on the individual and focused more on the research sit with low complexity. So they don't need to know your organization's context. So if you're trying to get your organization to individually be smarter, you can go after some of these tools. The next is functional specific tasks that need to be achieved. So if you take the good example of this is Salesforce, where Salesforce is looking at CRM and customer service. Now, within that space, there are a bunch of tasks that need to be accomplished, and they help accomplish those tasks. Now, given it is bounded, you don't have issues with complexity too much. Now you go to the next level in terms of workflows, which you are trying to enable, like content management, like supply chain, optimization of some sort. Now here, you will not only need to take what is there, but build something of your own. And that's where tools like Azure AI Foundry, Copilot Studio, any of these ones can play a role which is very effective. Let's talk about an architecture of what this systemic AI system can kind of look like. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these building blocks that make up systemic AI. In our minds, if you look at this architecture diagram, you'll find 5 key blocks. The first being the models themselves. Models have gotten very commoditized. All of you know that you can swap one model out with another, and you can continue to make that happen consistently. The second are the agents or the tools, as I like to think of them. The tools are, you have levels of them in terms of complexity. So you can have tools which are doing only a certain task, just like a hammer is only supposed to do one thing, versus a tractor is supposed to do something a lot more complex. The third, and this is probably one of the most important things, is the process context layer, which is your data, your metadata, your organizational strategy, your goals, your workflows of how something happens, which needs to be fed into the system in some form or fashion for it to do the things it needs to do. The fourth, which is orchestration, which is how do you bring these things together? I mean, if I think of a Sam Altman analogy that he used, which is that of a workforce, this is, in my mind, the manager, right? The manager or the translator who's trying to pull all of these pieces together and make sense out of it and do something with it. And finally, the interface and the integrations. If you have users who are used to a certain tool, do you want to sit and do the change management to get them away from there and do something else? How can you use the interfaces that they're already used to be able to push what you're already thinking about in terms of automation in there? So let's talk a little bit about the 4 of these, because I'm not going to talk about models. Everybody knows about the models and how commoditized they've gotten. But if you look at these 4 pieces of context, agents, orchestrator, and interface, each of them will have their own governance models. Each of them will need their own roadmap. The context, the governance models in context, the kind of questions that we're talking about are, what does a central group own in terms of context building? How do you manage it? How does the feedback loop work? If you think about business groups, what do the business groups own? How can these two work in tandem is one of the big questions that we're seeing in the context layer. What is context? How can we structure it so that we're able to use it for everything else is one of the big pieces that we're seeing. In terms of agents, you obviously have a lot of agents that you probably already have within your ecosystem. How can you use the ones that you have? What do you need to build? Who owns what? Right? These are some of the big questions that you're trying to answer at an agent level. At an orchestration level, who owns the framework of orchestration? What are the different kinds of orchestration needed? How can you apply this orchestration in a business context is the second big thing that they're talking about. And the last, in terms of interface, how can you design with the user in mind, with the persona in mind, and actually make it real for them? That's the last thing that you're talking about. I will stop with probably one more slide, which is, if you were going to take away some things from this session, these are the things I would like you to take away. I think the first thing is context is king. Enterprises need to own their own context and semantic layer. That is yours. That's your IP that you need to own. Nobody, no tool, no other organization is going to give it to you. You might get a head start, but you won't get it completed, and that is something only you can own. I think Sanjeev mentioned this as well. Start by a slice. Pick a piece, like for example, like a business function like marketing, or a sub-function of business like primary market research, and start building each of these building blocks by slice. The third, think of the users and the personas. We are still far away from a world where it is completely autonomous. Till that happens, you need to bring the know-how of these users into the system. And the only way to do that is to make them comfortable with it, make them trust it, and make sure that feedback is thought about in a good way. And the last piece, Think of governance at a block level. Don't think of it as an overall governance plan, because the way you think of governance for the context layer versus how you think of governance for agents versus how you think of governance for the interface will be different and needs to be different in some ways. So with that, I'll stop. We are publishing a white paper on this next week. You can scan the QR code in case you want to get this into your inboxes. And we're hoping that it is useful for you as you plan your journey over the next few years. Thank you.